Social Influence 2, Week 5 by Allie Colson, Advanced Social Psychology 512, Group 1, Week 5, Liberty University. This week, our reading material covered 2 chapters in the Casson book, Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. We also looked at 2 articles this week, one by Rees and Wallace on the myth of conformity, and the other by Holly, Hosch, and Bovard on exploring social identity theory and the black sheep effect. Casson, Chapter 7, covered conformity. This covers 4 topics that we will look at later: conformity, compliance, obedience, and social influence. Chapter 8 covered group processes. This covers our 5th topic of the presence of others. The first article we read this week was The Myth of Conformity, Adolescence and Abstention from Unhealthy Drinking Behavior by Rees and Wallace. They focused on the conversion theory. In their findings, they found that non-drinking friends in the minority can decrease the odds of a non-drinker's choice to drink, even when in a drinking majority. The second article we looked at was Exploring Social Identity Theory and the Black Sheep Effect Among College Student Athletes and Non-Athletes by Holly, Hosch, and Bovard. Their focus was on exploring the degree that both social identity theory, or SIT, and the Black Sheep Effect, or BSE, could be caused from collegiate athletes and non-collegiate athletes. Their findings did not support results for SIT or for BSE. In this presentation, we will cover 5 major themes: conformity, compliance, obedience, social influence, and the presence of others. The first is conformity, the tendency to change our perceptions, opinions, or behaviors in ways that are consistent with group norms. In this topic, we will look at the Sheriff and Ash study, where trained participants influence random participants to describe a shorter line as being longer. Compliance are changes in behavior that are elicited by direct requests. Obedience is a request of command coming from a figure of authority. Here, we will look at the Milgram study that we looked at earlier in this class. Social influence is the presence placed by group norms or the trap set by direct requests by authority. An example of this is the Holly study that we talked about in the last slide. Finally, the presence of others is engaging in activities in groups. An example of this is seen in the Rees and Wallace study. The first topic is conformity, the tendency to change our perceptions, opinions, or behaviors in ways that are consistent with group norms. There are 4 reasons that people will conform. The first is informational influence. This is the need to be right. People want to make good and accurate judgments of reality. The second is the normative influence, the fear of ostracism. People conform because they fear the rejection following the deviance. Third is private conformity. This is when people change their beliefs privately and quietly conform to a position of someone else. Finally, there's public conformity, a superficial change in behavior without a change of opinion. This is usually produced by real or imagined group pressure. The Sheriff and Ash study is an example of all 4 of the reasons for conformity. When we are uncertain of our own judgment, we can turn to others as a source of information, as seen in this study when the random participants looked to the trained participants for the right answer. Those that did go with the group said that they were convinced everyone else was wrong, but still answered that way. Those that went against the group reported feeling crazy or misfit-like. Next, we will look at compliance. This is changes in behavior that are elicited by direct requests. Usually these come quite subtly in 4 types of request strategies. The first is the foot in the door request. This is a small request to secure agreement following with a separate and longer request. Next is lowballing. This secures the agreement with a request and then increases it with hidden costs. Door in the face starts with a large request that will be rejected so that the original, more modest request is accepted. Finally, that's not all starts with an inflated request followed by an apparent decrease in size of request through deals or bonuses. Obedience is a request of command coming from a figure of authority. We saw this in the Milgram Forces of Destructive Obedience shock generator study. Milgram saw that without the request from authority, only 3% continued the shock. But when Milgram added an authority figure, someone in a white lab coat, that jumped to 65% of both male and female participants continuing the shocks. Social influence is the pressure placed by group norms or the trap set by direct requests of authority. This can depend on the person and how strong or determined their will is. Social impact theory is that social influence depends on strength, immediacy, and number of people relative to the target person. Sometimes social pressure is resisted when there are strong divisions and resistance between people or groups. In the Holly study, they looked at 3 hypotheses regarding social influence. The first was non-athlete students would be more punitive towards a main character described as a student athlete. The second, student athletes would assign fewer negative judgments to a student athlete. And third, student athletes would assign more negative judgments than non-athlete students to a main character described as a student athlete in high aggression, high athletic context scenarios. Unfortunately, their results did not find any support for either the social impact theory or the black sheep effect. Our last topic is on the presence of others. This is engaging in activities in groups. Presence of others can improve performance of people on simple tasks, but it also seems to impair performance of difficult tasks for people. Group interaction is when people tend to interact most with others in their group. Groupthink is a little bit more elaborate. This is interacting with others of shared convictions where the strength of these convictions lead people to lose their perspective on problems and engage in excessive tendencies. This tends to happen when the need for agreement takes over the need for obtaining accurate information. Things that lead to groupthink are highly cohesive groups, group structure, and stressful situations. My first question for you is based on Matthew 6, 1 through 4. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Does leading by action have a greater unconscious effect spiritually and psychologically? Does that mean that leading by faith or action alone, when you are the minority, could have a greater impact in spreading God's word than teaching it? My second question is based on the Rees and Wallace study. They say that the social life of an adolescent is often better if he or she conforms because failure to do so risks ostracism from the group. The ability to resist social influence and to rebel against group norms seems to be reserved for high-risk youth in their continuing personal attempts to resist conventional norms and their strong need for independence. What drives the need to be accepted but to also stand out? Throughout this presentation, we covered 2 chapters from the Kasson text, Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. We also reviewed 2 studies from articles we read this week. The first on conformity by Rees and Wallace, and the second on social identity theory and the black sheep effect by Hawley. We focused on 5 key themes: conformity, compliance, obedience, social influence, and the presence of others.